Now let's talk about some different landing scenarios that you may need to deal with if you don't get to the exact right spot at the exact right altitude. So we'll talk through how to adjust your altitude and adjust the landing pattern and how you're flying to get to your target landing area. Before we talk about holding, we're going to cover some basics about 360-degree turns. Most people think that a 360-degree turn under canopy looks something like this. And that's true if there is zero wind. But if we have wind, like we do on almost every jump, your 360-degree turn is going to be faster going with the wind or downwind, and you're going to cover less ground when you're facing into the wind. And then when you turn back downwind, you're going to pick up speed again. So this is what a 360-degree turn looks like in the air over the ground. So when we talk about holding a position over the ground, what we need you to do is face into the wind a longer amount of time than you do when you turn downwind. So for example, if we need you to hold in the playground area, that means you'll enter the playground area, probably in a downwind, you're covering a lot of speed, and then we're going to have you hold by turning into the wind and stay facing into the wind for a longer amount of time, get some forward movement, and then you can turn downwind and hold again by facing into the wind. What you don't want to do is you don't want to fly past your holding point, then turn into the wind, because now you're going to have a hard time trying to get forward movement, fighting the wind to make it back to your holding point. Now you're ready to start the landing pattern. So the goal is to be right here at the playground area at 800 feet to start your downwind. So what happens if you get to that point and you're too high? Let's say you make it to here, but you are at 1,000 feet instead. Well, what you can do is going back to the holding procedures. We get here early, so we're going to go ahead and turn back into the wind. We're going to hold facing the wind just a little bit longer, and then turn back to come back to our landing pattern entry, and by that time we probably have lost 100 or 200 feet to get us closer to the 800 foot. If you get to the landing pattern entry point and you're too low, let's say you're at 700 feet, you can go ahead and start your downwind, base, and final. There is a certain point where you're too low to do a normal landing pattern. So if you get to here and you are at 400 feet, you do not have enough time to do a downwind, base, and final, because that will put you facing the buildings at a low altitude. In this scenario, you're better off to go ahead and start a base directly and then right into the final into another landing area. Alright, so let's say we got to the landing pattern entry point at 700 feet. So we're starting the landing pattern just a little bit low already, which could mean that we get to our other altitudes a little bit earlier. In this scenario, you can get to 400 feet before you reach your target point over the ground. Once you reach 400 feet, go ahead and turn in on base, aiming for your next point. If you arrive at your base entry point too high, you have to go ahead and turn on the base. So let's say we reach this point and we are at 500 feet instead. Go ahead and turn and start your base leg of the landing pattern. It's better to start your base leg too high than to go past the do not cross line. Remember, we have a do not cross line right here that is a barbed wire fence. If you fly past that do not cross line, you're going to have a hard time flying into the wind to get back over that fence. And remember, with the wind coming out of the south, the wind is going to want to push you more to the north on your base leg. So remember, on your base leg, you're going to have to crab by facing a little bit into the wind. So here's the direction you are facing, so that the wind does not push you past the do not cross line. Here's our barbed wire do not cross line fence. The stronger the winds are, the more you're going to have to turn and face into the wind on the base leg to prevent from getting pushed over the fence. We have similar scenarios on the base leg. So if we're flying on our base leg and we reach 200 feet before our target point over the ground, we are going to go ahead and turn in on final right at this point. If you reach the final entry point too high, so you're on your base, you reach the final entry point, and instead of being 200 feet, you're at 300 feet or even 400 feet, we can do a small S-turn to lose altitude. So what we're going to do, downwind, base, we're going to go ahead and we reach here and we are at 300 feet. We're going to go ahead and turn, do a slow 180 degree turn facing back towards your base leg. Now we don't want you to come all the way back to your base entry point. That'll be too far. You're going to aim about halfway to 3/4 down, and then you're going to keep doing these S-turns back and forth until you reach 200 feet. The good thing about the S-turns is that no matter where you reach 200 feet, you can go ahead and turn in on final. Always turn into the wind when you are doing these S-turns. Later on in the progression, we'll teach you other ways to lose altitude that don't include S-turns. Once you turn on final, you may notice that you have a very slight drift to one direction or the other. You can stop the drift by pulling on the opposite toggle about 6 inches down for 1 to 2 seconds and then letting back up. Don't pull any harder than that or you'll initiate more of a turn. We're just looking for a very slight correction in drift. But make sure your hands are all the way up before you do the full flare. Once you turn in on final, you may notice that your canopy is pointed directly at an obstacle. In this case, we have this group of trees here. Once you turn in on final, you can make very small corrections to avoid the obstacle. You do not have to do a large turn to miss the obstacle. Our goal is to do the smallest turn possible and still miss the obstacle. In this case, we're landing just to the right of the obstacle, still missing it. If you do a hard turn to avoid the obstacle, let's say a 90-degree turn low to the ground, it's going to be more dangerous than actually landing on the obstacle itself. So remember, on final, no hard turns. You can do very minor corrections, and you still have to have your hands all the way up before you start the flare, and then do your flare at about 10 to 12 feet above the ground. At some point in time, most jumpers have made a turn too low to the ground at some point in their career. Once you recognize that you started a turn too low to the ground, the first thing you need to do is immediately stop the turn. At that point, you might have enough altitude for the canopy to level out, start flying straight, and then for you to do the flare 10 to 12 feet above the ground. Once you stop the turn, if you don't have enough altitude to let the canopy fully recover, you'll have to flare anyway while still in a partial turn. The key is to do the flare 10 to 12 feet above the ground if possible. Now let's talk about what causes a low turn. Most low turns are caused by somebody trying to make it back to the landing pattern and complete the full landing pattern when they don't have enough altitude. So in this example, if you're trying to start your downwind base and final, and let's say you're at 500 feet, people try to force this full landing pattern, and it ends up being one quick turn instead of 3 specific segments of a landing pattern. This one quick turn can result in a low turn near to the ground. And again, once you realize you're in a low turn, stop the turn and be ready to flare. And then, after the flare, PLF. The alternative would have been to go ahead and divert and land in an alternate landing area. In this first scenario, we can see that we've pretty much done a 180-degree turn. Whereas landing in the alternate area, we've probably done about, at most, a 90-degree turn. the smaller turn is going to be more safe than doing a full 180-degree turn. The disadvantage to landing in the alternate area is you have to walk longer to get back to the hangar. And like the saying goes in skydiving, a long walk is better than a short ambulance ride. Before your next jump, your instructor will help you check the winds, check the wind direction and wind speed, and then they will work with you and help you draw the planned landing pattern on the aerial. After that, they will go through these different scenarios with you to make sure you understand what to do in each one.